Hello everyone, my name is Paola.
And I'm Asia, and today we're going to talk about the cultural studies theory.
So let's start. The cultural studies theory founded by Stuart Hall can be defined as the theoretical perspective that focuses on how culture is influenced by powerful dominant groups. Cultural studies is rooted in politics, but not to electoral politics. Rather, the theory is aligned with the politics of identity mainly among culture, race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. Unlike several other theories, cultural studies does not refer to a single doctrine of human behavior. In fact, Stuart Hall persuasively argues that cultural studies has a number of different histories.
Now, to better understand the theory, we need to better understand its maker. Stuart Henry MacPhail Hall was a Jamaican-born academic, writer, and cultural studies pioneer. Hall was a Rhodes Scholar at Merton College, Oxford, director of the Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, and professor of sociology at the Open University. Again, understanding Hall's past allows us to understand some of what motivated his theoretical contributions. Through his thinking, writing, and speaking, Hall, as Jamaican, continued to try to understand his Jamaican culture and how it influenced his thinking and behavior. He believed there was a pigmentocracy in Jamaican society, meaning that skin color was paramount in his mind and family through his childhood. Hall was very much concerned with how central forces influenced the culture at large, and many scholars who embraced Hall's thinking simultaneously embraced the scholar himself, like David Morley, who stated that Hall's voice has been central in shaping many of the cultural and political debates of our time. This sort of posturing and orientation resonates throughout cultural studies. As the introduction to theory textbook states, while Hall already had a deep understanding of how much the U.S. culture heavily relies on media, the AIDS pandemic of the 80s really made Hall question the role of media and their false, misleading, and gut-wrenching images. Unlike other communication theorists, however, Hall focused on the role of the media and their ability to shape public opinions of marginalized populations, including people of color, the poor, and others who do not reflect a white, male, heterosexual, and wealthy point of view. Hall contends that the media are powerful tools of the elite. So within the cultural studies theory, it emphasizes that the media keeps the powerful people in control, while the less powerful absorb what is presented to them. Because media are controlled by corporations, the information presented to the public is consequently influenced and targeted with profit in mind. The media's influence and the role of power must be taken into consideration when interpreting a culture, because those without equal influence are usually subordinate to those with disproportionate influences.
Cultural studies is a tradition rooted in the writings of German philosopher Karl Marx. This is because the Marxist principle forms the foundation of the theory. This has prompted some scholars to consider the theory to be more neo-Marxist, which means the theory diverged from classical Marxism to some extent. As an example, unlike Marx, those in cultural studies have integrated a variety of perspectives into their thinking, including those from the arts, the humanities, the social sciences. Second, theories in cultural studies expand the subordinate group to include additional powerless and marginalized people, not just laborers. These groups include, among others, the LGBTQ plus communities, various racial, ethnic, minority groups, women, and even children. Marx's original thinking may have been appropriate for a post-World War II population, but his idea now requires clarification and elaboration to a more diverse society. Cultural studies, on the other hand, move beyond a strict, limited interpretation of society towards a more broad idea of the culture.
Now, let's talk about hegemony. The concept of hegemony is an important feature of cultural studies, and much of the theory rests on an understanding of this term. Cultural hegemony refers to domination or rule maintained through ideological or cultural means. It is usually achieved through social institutions, which allow those in power to strongly influence the values, norms, ideas, and behavior of the rest of the society. Hegemony is but one component of the intellectual currents associated with cultural studies. Although people are frequently influenced by dominant societal forces, at times hegemonic tendencies will emerge in the population.
Also, cultural hegemony functions by framing the worldview of the ruling class and the social and economic structure that embody it and designed to benefit. Even though this structure may only benefit to the ruling class, an example of this can be the United States. The hegemonic culture is one of the ones controlled largely by white people, and Carter's too, or represents the majority rather than incorporating some type of diversity that will more accurately represent the nation's population.
Encoding is the production of a message using verbal as well as nonverbal symbols, and decoding is the interpretation of the message. Decoding is a negotiation of the receiver with the text based on his or her knowledge, cultural background, and experiences.
Following the book of Introduction of Theory, there are 3 ways in which decoding can take place. First, preferred reading is where the decoded message is the same as encoded message. The receiver completely agrees with the idea that women should be beautiful and fair. Second, negotiating reading is where the decoded message is partially the same as encoded message. The receiver accepts that some women are beautiful and fair, but holds it's not necessary for every woman to be so. Hall says that encoding and decoding take a big part in the cultural stories theory, because theoretical approach of how media messages are produced, disseminated, and interpreted. That is why important in the cultural stories theory.
Like with any theory, there are some criticisms. The first criticism relates to the audience. Mike Budd, Robert Entman, and Clay Steinman suggest that some cultural and critical theorists overestimate the ability of oppressed and marginalized populations to escape their culture, particularly those communities that lack the skills, insights, and networks. Escaping is very difficult.
Another criticism is that theory rejects universal account of cultural practices, meanings, and identities.
And finally, cultural studies theorists would/could never consider using experimental methods, making this theory reliant upon qualitative investigation.
So how can the cultural studies theory be applied? Our culture affects our daily life, whether we realize it or not. How we speak, our fashion, even how we work. Understanding the objective of the cultural studies theory will help you better implement a new way of thinking. This is how Hall wants us to apply his theory to our everyday lives. Get to know your own culture and try to understand others. Question the media and question our society.
Hall once said, "Culture is not something to simply appreciate or study, but a critical site of social action and intervention where power relations are both established and potentially unsettled." Hall wanted us to understand the voices that usually go unnoticed. Culture can persuade us in how we make choices, so make them based off the knowledge you learned today and the perspective of a cultural studies thinker.
Thank you.